welcome back to another episode of the DailyFlip podcast. I'm your host, Alex. Today we're going to be flipping through a story talking about DeepSeek, the implications of our tariffs against them, how China is beating our expectations on AI, all that conversation that you probably heard about Monday, Tuesday. We're going to discuss it here because there's a little bit more context and some backstory that I also want to provide that I think may illuminate why it's happened and it really came out of nowhere. And of course, we will end today with our daily delight. A story meant to leave you feeling positive, ready to take on the day. Hey, but that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our daily debate. So is this a Sputnik moment? That is one of the terms that has been thrown around, especially with the idea that we are inferior, that we have to wake up, we have to use our capabilities as a nation of brilliant people in order to catch up or at least acknowledge that another country could be better than us at something. That is why the Sputnik moment and the use of that term has continually been popping up. So, in your opinion, is this a Sputnik moment? I think with the rest of the conversation from today, you may have a little bit of a different opinion once we're done, but I want to know what your opinion is right now. Throw it in the comments section. And with that said, let's jump into the article that comes from The Telegraph. Headline reads, Trump AI czar, substantial evidence China's DeepSeek copied ChatGPT. Now, why is DeepSeek such a huge revelation? Why did it cause a giant crash in the stock market? If you've been paying attention to news, Fox News, or any of the liberal media, or any podcast hosts, they've probably heard about it. You probably heard their explanation. You have some understanding of why this is such a big deal. For those of you who are not fully up to date, we'll provide it to you this way. We'll make it simple. If we spend $600 billion in order to get a certain result, as let's say a private company does it in the United States, and then another company comes in and can do it for $5 billion, and that's not necessarily the estimations here, but the point being that for that much cheaper and get a very similar result, then the stockholders are going to say, why would I keep my money in something that takes, what's the math there? Takes basically 12 times as much money in order to get similar results. No, I'm going to put my money in the cheaper option because then return on investment will be much higher because people will say, oh, the results from this thing are pretty similar. I should use it instead, get my data to it. So you can understand why that would send a lot of stocks that are in AI tumbling. And considering the processes that they were using in order to actually crunch all this different data were NVIDIA chips, and it was thought that NVIDIA chips were the only way that you could actually crunch this much data using more GPU-focused hardware. Then when you realize, oh, we might not actually have to use that, of course NVIDIA's stock is going to drop because everybody thought NVIDIA was going to be a key cornerstone of this future AI establishment that was growing, and they're realizing, well, maybe that's not the case. So that's the quick summary of why you saw this ripple effect and why people were freaking out about it. But what does this actually mean for us in the United States? Is it a Sputnik moment? Is there room for a different interpretation? I think, of course, there is room for a different interpretation. I definitely think that it's a humbling moment. Is it on Sputnik's level? Not necessarily, because as this article points out, there is some suspicion about them not necessarily being honest about how they actually crunched all this data. Do they use as many chips in non-NVIDIA chips as they say, which could have been cheaper? And also, there's a little bit of rumors that it's possible that they took some of this information from ChatGPT. Quote, David Sachs, the U.S. president's AI and cryptocurrency advisor, said the Chinese upstart may have trained its technology by sucking knowledge out of OpenAI's model in a method known as distilling. Western governments are assessing the security implications of DeepSeek, which has shocked the AI world and shaken stock markets with a heavily capable system seemingly developed at a fraction of the cost of Western rivals. OpenAI backed Mr. Sachs' claims, saying that there was some evidence of distillation and a technique that essentially allows AI models to become more advanced by using learnings from other models, end quote. So the idea that they're getting at here, and I think it would illuminate something very important, is basically what China has done a lot of, stealing intellectual property. They let OpenAI, Google, Meta, all these different companies put all the resources into these projects and basically took their learnings, anything that they learned from those projects, and said, oh, okay, now we can use them in order to build our model. Why is that important is probably the best way, because of course then you could develop your own model for cheaper, because you don't have to pay for the startup costs. You don't have to pay for all of the different software engineers that are constantly going back and forth and trying to find solutions to problems. You don't have to go through the weeks upon weeks of iterations in order to find workarounds in order to get what you want. You can just directly steal it from somebody else, and you don't necessarily have to have the giant data centers to process the data on the front end. You can just steal the end results in the way that it got that information and then outsource that to somewhere else. So the point being that this can have ripple effects when you just steal this information. But I want to pretend, and let's be clear, I want to allow that that's probably what is happening here. There's some degree to it. We know China as a country and as a business practice is not against stealing ideas and intellectual property. Not to say that they're not able to create their own things, but we know that at least on espionage level, the government is more than willing to do it and very often does. But the idea, let's move past the reality of that and the possibility of there being deceptions on their part. And let's assume that every single claim that they make is real. Let's go based off of that, saying that they use the amount of chips that they use, that this is their open AI model. And they did most of the evolution, the important changes through software. This is extremely, extremely important when you still look at the NVIDIA side of things. Even if it is completely true that they did everything the way they did, then we have to look at the implications beyond that, which are they're not using NVIDIA chips, or at least they shouldn't be, because we have export bans on NVIDIA chips or any key technologies that go into AI. I reported about this. I take that back. I talked about this on a podcast. Somebody else reported about it. We read the article. The links are still back there. But we talked about this export ban on AI technologies to China that Joe Biden had cracked down on. It wasn't just the U.S. It was also any country that was associated with the U.S. supply chain, aka some of the largest the chip manufacturing machines that are really popular in Netherlands. They couldn't export them to China, or TSMC couldn't necessarily couldn't send their technologies over to China. And I made an argument then, which is trying to shut off the spigot and make sure that China doesn't gain access to these sort of things. There's the likelihood that it strangles them, but there's also the possibility, considering their really large industrial base that they have in that country, that they could actually start producing their own chips, that they wouldn't have to rely on outside markets in order to produce some of these things, because they'd rather steal the information. They would have smart people that can figure it out, find new processes, and they would be able to develop their chip industry internally in China to be strong enough in order to compete with us. This is the problem with tariffs. When you actually start to unravel the economies between countries, no longer are they reliant on other countries. And let's be clear, not all countries inherently are during trade. Some of them have active goals in order to wean off what they buy from other nations. But the point being that China, no longer being dependent, has to come up with new processes, make some of these new advanced chips. And DeepSeek is a great example of, if it is all true, if they did everything with internal Chinese technology using software improvements, this is the example of what can be done when you cut or hamstring other economies and you cut them out of your supply chains and you try to limit their capabilities. This is a great example of how they can come in and eat your lunch, because they are totally reliant on their own processes now. They are put into a corner where they can no longer go the common route, and they have to innovate and they have to reiterate. And this was one of the shocking repercussions of that movement, if all of this holds true. And that is what I actually outlined in that episode. I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm right. What I'm trying to say is that this tariff scheme doesn't necessarily work out in our favor. Cutting them out of the pie doesn't work in our favor. We want the innovation to come here. So we don't want the innovation to come there. So to put more hamstrings and restrictions and roadblocks in their way there forces them into a place where they have to continue to innovate. Why do that when we can have an open exchange of ideas and iterate together, and then also have the experts come here, have less restrictions on Chinese experts or anybody that's an AI expert coming to the United States in order to work on these programs? Of course, there are very interesting national security implications. So we would have to be cautious about that. But it's meant to highlight, and this point that I'm trying to get across is meant to really show that tariffs, while they can be effective at levying penalties against countries, while they can be effective at protecting the agencies and companies in the country that the tariffs are being implemented in, that does not mean that we actually silo the smartest people here. That doesn't mean that we silo the innovation here. We are actually begging other people to be more innovative so that they don't have to pay the taxes in order to get their products into the United States and get market penetration and have access to the companies that are the most innovative. We're basically begging other people to say, hey, let's try to become less dependent on the U.S. economy, and let's actually build up infrastructure so that we don't have to rely on any of their goods and already be present in said market. And it's a fascinating game that we're playing between here. This is just a prime example, in my opinion, like I said, if everything holds true, of how tariffs can backfire. And this is going to, in my opinion, lead to my broader point, which is Trump needs to be very careful with where he is putting his tariffs. This AI battle is the next generation. This is the next frontier. Now, am I saying that it's as important as space? Honestly, I would say no. I think space is more important. But I understand that it could have wider implications than space does. I mean, space affected a lot of us, and we had many great technologies created by trying to get there. But currently, space is inaccessible to a large segment of the population. That is less important to the general public than AI is, which basically everybody can access now, at least not general AI, general intelligence, or artificial general intelligence, AGI, but some form of artificial intelligence that is able to emulate human behaviors. Everybody can have access to that. The wide-ranging repercussions of this AI battle, who has the predominant AI, what company is able to maintain the most amount of users, and therefore actually influence them based on how they're using their AI products, because whether we like it or not, it's going in that direction. I think space is still more important, but that doesn't deny that the AI battle is going to have wider ramifications across the entire planet. And this is the next, honestly, intelligence battle. The company that maintains and has the best AI that is used by the most people has an easy way to actively send them information, change what is being seen, and shape narratives. Just like Instagram, Facebook, they can shape narratives through social media, just like iPhone can even shape narratives, though they choose not to because of their market penetration. They theoretically could by only allowing certain type of information onto their phones. This is the next battle in the information war, and AI systems can become even more advanced to do even more and be even more capable of things and harvest even more data from people just simply from conversational text alone. So this is the next frontier. Whether you want to admit it or not, this is where everybody is putting their focus when it comes to the intelligence wars that are coming down the pipe. So to have those technologies developed here, to have the innovation here, I would prefer that. As an American citizen, I would prefer that. I'm sure UK citizens would prefer otherwise. But at the end of the day, I know most Western powers probably do not want China at the top of the pile. So how do we get to the point where we are able to match them? One, we have to start from a first principles basis. What are we missing? What are we forgetting? Is there anything we could change? Is the software out of date? Is there any way that we could actually use different chips in order to get to our certain ends? That's going to hurt the current supply chain. It's going to hurt a lot of people's assumptions about how this process works, but we have to go back to a first assumption basis. Two, we need to not funnel billions upon billions of dollars from the federal government into it. If corporations want to spend their money, they want to create joint ventures and spend their money in order to advance their product, great. They take on their own risk of it, and therefore are willing and have to actually reduce costs in order to make it efficient. If the government just continually hands out money, then there's a possibility that these AI companies become dependent on government handouts, or at least they are not being as efficient as possible because it's not their money that they are spending. These are all considerations that need to be made as we move forward, and as Trump is seemingly more willing to engage in sort of propping up of these domestic markets. We've already seen what happens when we directly, and like I said, if it holds true that this process is completely legitimate on their part and they're using Chinese chips that they don't necessarily have access to NVIDIA chips, the point would be that a tariff scheme, not put in by Trump, but put in by Biden, but a tariff scheme, a scheme that was meant to directly protect our own country's resources and protect our own supply chains, actually ended up hurting us when it comes to the competitive front of what these companies are able to do. And if more protectionism is the answer to that, I don't think that that's going to end the way that we want it to. So these are big questions, and I wanted to tie all of them together because, like I said, there was an example back then, and I said it at the time that this is something that we would have to consider. And when I saw DeepSeek come out, and I saw the conversation happen about it, and then the conversation revolved around how they were able to do such things, it just took me back to that moment. Like I said, I'm not an oracle. I'm not trying to brag. I'm trying to say that there are real world implications of the policies that we implement, and especially in a free market system, normally they are more predictable than you would assume. And to pretend as though you have a new model for how things are going to work without evidence that backs it up, when we have hundreds of years of free market systems and protectionist policies devastating economies over the long run, is childish. And it honestly begs the question of whether you're arrogant enough to believe that you can transcend economics and economic study for the last 150 years. So with that said, let's jump into our daily delight. Let's end on a positive note, not on a negative note. If you do want to check out that article from The Telegraph, the links are in the description below that like and subscribe button. But this time, we're going to go to an article for our daily delight from animals around the globe. Meet Peabody, the tiny horse that thinks he's a dog. And honestly, this horse, the way that he interacts in the household, the way he runs around, he's trying to get into stuff, is honestly adorable. If you want to see him and his cute antics, you can go read the article. It also describes a little bit more about the different horse breeds, pygmy horses, that sort of thing. And you can go there to the links in the description, like I talked about just a second ago. If you want to find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Podvine, all the links are down there as well. And if you want to get links to every single thing that comes out on this YouTube channel on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So this episode on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 6 and 6, the international news stories that comes out on Tuesday and Thursday. You can go to the Twitter handle at your DailyFlip, and I post them there every single day, so you can just click on them and come directly to it. So with all that said, there is only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.